Hey, welcome back to the workshop. For today's project, I'm going to be making a knife out of 3-layer laminated San Mai steel. Now, I've never worked with San Mai before. I'm not entirely sure how this is going to go, but I'm sure I'm going to learn a lot, and I hope you learn something too. Stick with me and check it out. So this piece of San Mai is a little under 1/8 inch thick, and it consists of a core of 52-100 high carbon steel, sandwiched inside 2 layers of 410 stainless steel. I can see from the layering that this stuff is really thin. I'm going to have to be pretty careful with how I grind it. So here's my rough plan. When this is all done, I'd like to have no more than 1/4 inch of the high carbon steel exposed at the edge. I'd like most of this to be stainless to protect this blade against corrosion. And if I've done my number crunching correctly, this means I can grind my primary bevel as high as 3/4 of an inch and still maintain my 1/4 inch clearance here. Now, it probably won't be exactly like this, but I'm going to see how close I can get. This knife will be made with the stock removal method rather than forging. So the first thing to do is trace the pattern out on the blade and get it cut out with the metal cutting bandsaw. After this, the rough sawn edges need to be cleaned up with the grinding wheel and then deburred with the wire wheel. Next, I'll be using blue permanent marker as a substitute for layout fluid. Using real blue Dykem layout fluid would be better, but for what I'm doing here, blue permanent marker ain't half bad. The knife is now measured out, and my approximate grind lines are etched in with a sharp metal scribe. I'm probably not good enough at freehand grinding to come all that close to these lines, but I'm going to do the best I can with the equipment that I've got. After that, the next thing to do is cut in the plunge lines on the main bevel with a couple of triangular and round files. Cutting in the plunge lines in this way is one of the things I can do that really helps me get a better result when I'm using the Harbor Freight 4x36 as my main grinder. One of the big problems with the 4x36 is that it doesn't cut very good plunge lines because it doesn't have a good 90-degree edged platen for me to work off of. This method also prevents washing out your plunge lines while grinding. Because the line is already cut, pretty much all of your grinding happens in front of this line, and so the line stays clean and even on both sides, and there's a lot less you have to worry about while you're doing the main bevel grind. Now it's time to start grinding. I like to set the edge by grinding in some pretty steep bevels right there at the edge, and then after that, getting right into the main body of the grinding. I want to do as much of the grinding as I can before heat treating this knife, mostly because I've never dealt with San Mai before, and for all I know, it could be a real bastard to grind on it after the heat treat is complete. Okay, well, that's pretty much done for the main bevels. Let's see how we did. Well, this side of it looks pretty close to the line, but the other side, not so much. Okay, so the rough grinding is pretty much done. And unfortunately, like a lot of my freehand grinding, it's not really very even from one side to the next. But that's okay. I can blend that out and kind of hide that. And in the end, it's not going to matter that much. The next thing to do is put a little ferric chloride on here and see how we did with our 52-100 high carbon edge. Now that does matter. That needs to be fairly even so that when we go to heat treat this, hopefully it doesn't warp or crack or do anything crazy. Alright, got an old bottle of Radio Shack ferric chloride here. And yep, there's our line. Oh, that looks pretty good. It's reasonably even. Reasonably even on this side too. So far, that's not half bad. It's not perfect, but I think it's close enough that I'm going to go ahead and put this into the heat treat and get this hardened up. Then we can move on to cleaning it up and fixing my mistakes.
You're supposed to heat treat blades like this, wrapped in a pouch made out of stainless steel foil to prevent decarb and forge scale and all sorts of things from building up on the surface of the blade. But I don't have any stainless steel foil, so instead I'm going to try to coat the blade with a thin layer of goop made out of water, wood ash, and furnace cement. I'm hoping that this will make the blade easier to clean up after heat treat is complete. For the heat treat of this knife, I'm using the instructions for the heat treatment of 52-100 steel as adopted from KnifeSteelNerds.com, supplemented with information from Alpha Knife Supply. I'm going to slowly bring the heat up to 1560 degrees Fahrenheit and hold it there for about 10 minutes. After that, it gets quenched in preheated canola oil.
So after the quench, we've got kind of an interesting result going on here. The stainless steel cladding is all crudted up and black with a thick coat of, I guess, baked on canola oil and scale and nasty stuff. But up here where the 52-100 high carbon edge is, it's actually pretty clean. And you can even see that on the spine. You can see the high carbon layer in the middle came out pretty clean, and the stainless on the outside is real cruddy.
The next thing to do is get this knife tempered. According to my charts, I should temper this knife somewhere in the neighborhood of 375 degrees Fahrenheit for 2 cycles of 2 hours each. If all goes well, this should put my final edge hardness somewhere around Rockwell 60. Next comes the always tedious task of sanding and polishing up the blade. This is where the stainless steel foil in the heat treat would have came in really handy. Maybe I should break down and buy some of that. As it stands, I've got about 3 hours of sanding to do here. I'm going to start with a 240 grit sandpaper, then move up to 400, then finally up to 800. 800 grit is probably where this knife is going to stay. After cleanup, the blade goes back into the ferric chloride for about 1 minute. We've got a bit of an unusual result here. I expected the high carbon edge to etch in much darker than the stainless steel. But for now, it looks like all we've done is etch kind of the carbon transition line between the 52-100 and the 410 stainless. That's kind of weird. Anyway, it's time to set the blade aside for a while and move on to making the handle. The handle of this knife is going to be a piece of figured walnut with a bolster made out of the smashed quarters mokume gane that I made in a previous video. So, over the course of working with my smashed quarters mokume gane, I've learned that despite what it looks like, the layers of copper and nickel are not actually forge welded together. They're more stuck together like soldering or brazing copper pipe. And why that's important is you have to be careful when you're handling it, or because the layers will want to delaminate on you at the worst possible moment. Here I'm scribing my layout for where my knife tang is going to go. This turned out to be a mistake. I should not have etched the lines in with a hard scribe. In doing so, I actually cut all the way through the top layer of mokume, which is really, really thin. I mean, it's like 1/1000ths, maybe 2. And because I cut a line through it like this, it wanted to delaminate and start to flake off at the line. So keep that in mind if you're working with this material. Now, I can't speak for other types of mokume gane made in other fashions, but at least for the one that you make out of smashed quarters, just be aware that this material is actually very fragile, despite how it may appear. The other thing I learned when working with this mokume is that it doesn't want to drill very cleanly. It wants to gum up the bit and gall and kind of wedge. And when you're making really small holes with a really small drill bit like this, that will quickly break your drill bit. I found out that the best way to handle this is to drill a tiny bit at a time and keep clearing your chips. Drill a little bit, clear the chips, drill some more, clear some more, and finally you'll get your hole to go through. The back side of the tang slot is widened out quite a bit. This is to allow clearance for the files on the front side of the slot, which will be precisely fitted to the knife tang. I think a ball end milling bit would be better for this than the straight bit and the cone bit that I'm using here. But just like everything in this shop, I ain't got one, so we're gonna make the best out of what we got. The next thing to do here is take my set of very, very small files and work to clean up this hole, this slot here in the guard of my knife. The idea is we're going to take this nasty, drilled, snarly, messed up hole and hopefully turn it into a nice, clean, sharp-cornered rectangular hole. Alright, this slot in the guard is almost where it needs to be, but let's set this aside for a minute and move over to the wood part of the handle. This handle is made out of curly walnut and is going to be progressively drilled and stepped up to a hole of about 3/8 of an inch. At 3/8 of an inch, this hole in the handle is still a little bit undersized for the tang of the knife that's going in here. So for the last little bit, the tang is actually going to be burned in to ensure a tight, precise fit. Prior to final assembly and glue up, the front face of the metal bolster will get sanded up to a kind of a rough brushed finish. This isn't getting a full mirror polish because the rest of the knife isn't getting a full mirror polish either. Keeping it brushed keeps in theme with the rest of the knife. I'm a little concerned about structural integrity in the handle of this knife because I did drill a fairly large hole down the center of it. So instead of my usual West Systems G-Flex epoxy, I'm gluing this knife up with JB Weld. JB Weld is so thick it's very difficult to get it to go down in the hole. So to ensure good fill all the way down to the bottom, I'm using a glue syringe that I picked up from Hobby Lobby. There's going to be a lot of nasty, messy squeeze out in the course of this, but that's okay. This is mostly all going to get sanded off. It's not going to show when the knife is all done. Time to get this clamped up and set aside overnight for the glue to cure. The handle shape of this knife is going to be based on the handle of this Mora Companion HD. I like to cut out the rough outline of my handle on the bandsaw, but after that, the bulk of the shaping is done with hand files. I do the bulk of my handle profiling with round and half-round files. This takes a while, but if you don't have any fancy contact wheels for your sander, this will get the job done. I like to start with a fairly coarse cutting file to do the bulk of my wood removal, and then move to a finer, smoother cutting file to smooth out the rough marks from the first file. After that, there's nothing for it but to move up to sandpaper. Finally, after a whole bunch of filing and sanding and filing some more and sanding some more, the whole handle is brought up to about a 600 grit finish. It's time to put some linseed oil on this and see how it looks. Man, that's pretty. I'm pretty happy with that. You know, the fit and finish on this isn't real great, but like everything else we make around here, this is a working knife, not a showpiece. I think, at least for now, I'm going to go ahead and call this one finished. Okay, I guess for better or for worse, this is what we're working with here. There's a couple things to note about this knife. One, I don't know why the San Mai came out like this. I was really expecting, after etching this in the ferric chloride, that I was going to get a, this should be fairly silver up here where the 410 stainless is. But I expected the edge of 52-100 to etch in a dark black, and it hasn't done that. I do get my carbon transition line, which I did expect, but I also don't know why it's all spotty up here. I thought this blade was good and clean when I did this. And so this result's a bit strange, and if anyone knows why this sort of thing happens, please let me know in the comments below. The other thing to point out here is that making the guard out of my smashed quarters mokume gane doesn't show up the layers really well right now. But over time, the copper will naturally age and darken, and this will start to look better and better and show the grain as time goes on. I don't want to heat it like I did before to instantly reveal the grain because I run the risk of burning the wood or screwing up the temper in the steel. So I'm just going to have to let this age in naturally. So it isn't perfect, but I've never worked with San Mai before, and I'm pretty happy with this for a first try. The next one will be better. So I hope you found that interesting, and I'll be right back here in the workshop with another project just as soon as I can. See you then.